except, so I'm going to copy and paste, but carefully change n to be something else. Okay, let me do this trick here. So this way we can scroll one side without affecting the other side. And this n should be 1. Because when I execute, okay, let me just show both of these at the same time. Because when I execute line 8, okay, over here, I am actually using the context of column F, which means n minus 1 is using n being 2, 2 minus 1 is 1. Is that okay? Because this can be a little bit confusing right here. Is that okay? Okay, so let me just kind of quickly explain how you can resolve this. We are on line 8. Line 8 is this code here. We are taking care of this invocation, the one that is on the left-hand side of the add, because that's the one that is replaced by a single question mark. When we invoke f, we have to specify n minus 1 to go to the parameter n. This n refers to the end of the invoking subroutine, which means this n is referring to column f, which is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. That is used to specify the parameter n that I'm setting up right here on column h. That's why column h has a value of 1. And once I set up the columns, I can go ahead and go into the subroutine again. We start with line 3 again. But this time it is slightly different because n equals 1 is actually true, which means we don't have to go to line 5 anymore. We go to line 4 instead. Line 4 is a return statement. Every return statement only has one job to do. It will copy and paste the return info cell, whatever it has. I don't really care about the content of that cell except for the question mark. Okay? I will copy and paste this line over here, look for the question mark, and replace the question mark with whatever value I'm returning. In this case, it's easy because the value I'm returning is a constant. There's no calculation involved. So I'll just copy, paste, look for the question mark. There should only be one question mark. If you have two question marks inside the return info cell, something has gone wrong. So the single question mark is now replaced by the value that I'm returning. In this case, it's just 1. And I'm done. The return statement has done its job. And we can move on. There are no additional things to do inside the conditional statement. I get out of the conditional statement. I end up on line 10. Line 10 is the end of the entire subroutine, which will do the usual thing, which means we are going to deallocate the columns that we allocated when we execute or when we get into the subroutine. Column G and column H are now deallocated. Where are we going? I'm done with line 10. I'm at the end of a subroutine. So how do you know where to go to continue execution? The return info, right? That's why we have a return info, is to tell me where to go and how to continue execution. It tells me I'm supposed to go back to line 8. Line 8 was like this, but it is no longer like that. It is now more like this because the first invocation of f is already done. It is already resolved. Okay? And we have a second invocation. We have this invocation to deal with at this point. Okay? So that's why as soon as we get back to line 8, we are invoking f again, but this time we are dealing with the one on the right-hand side of the addition symbol. We still have to say that we are going back to line 8, because if you don't indicate that we're going back to line 8, then who is invoking f? So we got to remember to say that we are back to line 8, except this time when we get back to line 8, we are invoking f right away to resolve the invocation on the right-hand side of the addition. Are we okay? In other words, we are executing line 8 the way it seems at this point. So that means line 8, this part is already resolved. There's nothing to change. But the second invocation is the one that I'm dealing with right now, and that's why the second invocation is the one that is replaced by a single question mark at this point. Is that okay? Whichever invocation you're dealing with, that's the one that is replaced by a single question mark. And you can only invoke one subroutine at a time.
Next question is, what am I going to go to? Oh, okay, I forgot one thing. I forgot to label. This is my return info cell, and this is my parameter n. What am I going to put here? Now this is a little bit confusing because we are executing this line here, but using the context of f. F has a value of 2, and we are invoking the second invocation. We are dealing with the second invocation. N is 2, 2 minus 2 is 0. And that's why column H will now have a value of 0. Are we doing okay at this point? Really? Okay. Because this really is going to be, this is one of the more confusing part, but we have done it already on Monday, just in a slightly different context. Once I set up the columns, once again, we go back into the subroutine, and I have to split the screen again, but this time vertically. We're back to line 3, and I have to align everything here. We're back to line 3, and line 3 is asking, does n equal to 1? No, does not. Then we go to line 5. Line 5 asks, does n equal to 0? Yep, it does equal to 0. N is 0 at this point. We go to line 6, which returns 0. Okay? Any return statement would only do this. It will just copy and paste the return info cell, look for the question mark, and replace the question mark with the value that we are returning. In this case, line 6 is explicitly says that we're supposed to return a constant of 0, and that's why line 8 now becomes return 1 plus 0. It is important to remember the return statement is only going to replace the question mark. It does not execute whatever the return info has. Okay, because we are not at line 8 right now, for one thing, and two, we have done our job, because our job on line 6 is just to replace the question mark with a 0. That's all we are supposed to do. After line 6, there's nothing else to do in the conditional statement. We get out, and we end up on line 10. Line 10, once again, is the end of a subroutine. We just deallocate everything that we had allocated for this invocation, and then we continue execution based on the return info cell. The return info cell tells me I'm supposed to go back to line 8, and that's why we are going back to line 8. But this time, what does line 8 look like? Line 8 used to look like this, with 2 invokes. Then it became like this, with only 1 invoke left. Now it has no invocations left. In other words, we have now resolved the values of both of the invocations. One return a value of 1, one return a value of 0. There's nothing else to do. We can do the computation right here. 1 plus 0 is 1. Okay? In other words, line 8, which used to be kind of complicated, is now equivalent to just returning 1. So we are ready to execute line 8 now, to execute the return part of line 8. What do we do when we have a return statement? We copy and paste the return info cell. How come we are not dealing with, column G anymore? Exactly, column G is now deallocated, and that's why it is very important to remember to indicate when a column is deallocated. Because if you don't, then you will be mistakenly using the wrong column for this purpose. And then the next thing we do is we replace the question mark with the value that we are returning. In this case, we are returning 1 because we are literally executing line 8 like return 1 plus 0. Are there any questions at this point why we have a 1 to replace the question mark on row 22 of the trace? No questions? Okay. Now this part is a little bit confusing as well because we are executing line 8. It just so happens the return info is also line 8. But don't let that bother you, okay? When you are executing a return statement, just blindly copy and paste the return info cell, look for the question mark, and replace the question mark with the value that you're returning. It may so happen that this is also line 8, which is the line that you're executing. Don't let that bother you, okay? Because if you think too much about it, that's going to cause problems. Okay. You can probably imagine the computer itself does not do a whole lot of thinking. It just do it, right? It just do it based on the rules, and that's exactly what we have to do when we want to understand how a program executes. Okay. After we are done with line 8, we move on to line 10, because line 8 is the only thing we have to do in the else case. So now we are back to line 10 again. Line 10 is the end of a subroutine. It will do its usual thing, which is deallocating all the columns that we allocated earlier. And we'll go back to whatever line that the return info is telling me to go back to. In this case, the return info column is column E. Column E is telling me to go back to line 8. And that's why we are going back to line 8. And line 8 now looks like this. Return 1 plus invoke f, n minus 2 goes to n. Do we have anything else to do? Can we execute the return right away? Or do we have something else we have to do before executing the return itself? Exactly. We have to invoke a second time on line 8. Okay. So let's go back to that particular line 8. And I'm going to have to change this a little bit so we can see the context, or at least what is the value of n when we get back to line 8. We're back to line 8. Line 8 now looks like this. Just like the way we describe it in column E, we have to now handle the second or the right-hand side of the addition. It is invoking f again, this time with n minus 2 to specify n. The n minus 2 on the left-hand side refers to the n of column D, which now has a value of 3, always has a value of 3. 3 minus 2 is 1, which means when we set up n again, the new n is going to have a value of 1. So that's exactly what we're going to do, is to specify return info, because every time we invoke f, we have to specify return info as well as parameter n. Return info in this case is going to be the same thing as in column E, cells E22, except this time the second invocation is also replaced by a single question mark. Yep?
Why didn't we do that the previous time? Where the last time we did something at 8, we didn't have the return info and then on the side.
The last time we did it, we also have the return info.
Right above where we deallocated it?
Yep.
We didn't have this return info.
It was way up.
Oh, was it? All right.
It's right here.
Okay.
Yep, because I have to indicate how we use that column. It's just a label. When this program actually executes inside the computer, it does not actually have a label for that column. It already natively understands what that column is being used for. But for our class, I just want to make it extra clear what we are using this column for. And in this case, we're using this column as the return info for that purpose. And then the next column is used for parameter n, and we have to put a 1 here because 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay. Are we doing okay so far? Kind of? Okay. Once we set up the columns, we go back and start executing from the beginning of f again, which is on line 3. So now we go back to line 3. Line 3 is asking, does n equal to 1? Oh, yes, it does, because column F does have a value of 1. So that means we have to go to line 4. Line 4 is going to do one thing, returning a value of 1. Well, whenever we return a value, we take whatever the return info has, copy and paste it, and change the question mark to the value that we are returning. Okay? And we are done with line 4. Line 4 is pretty easy. After line 4, there's nothing else to do inside the conditional statement. We get all the way out to line 10. Line 10 is the end of the subroutine. We have to say that these two columns have to be deallocated.